Welcome. It's really good to see you all here at Spark Arts. My name is Lexi Laban. I'm the executive director of the Jewish Film Institute, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the post-film conversation. If she can see it, she can be it. So thank you for coming over after the film. We have a terrific panel for you here today. And I want to thank the Women's Fund of the Jewish Community Federation and Endowment Fund for supporting us. Let's give them a big round of applause. This program is part of a 2-year initiative that they are funding to use film as a catalyst for conversation on issues of equity and inclusion and diversity in particularly for women, but I think we'll find the conversation today is going to talk about identity in general and how it might affect how we see films. What I'm really excited about is there's a lot of really revolutionary thinking happening on the horizon. There have been a lot of studies out about gender representation in film, both behind the camera, in front of the camera, and then in the film criticism world. And there was a big study that came out that I think these folks are going to talk about. And we're seeing a lot of change. And so it's not that we don't have a long way to go still, but I think things are really, there's an awareness, I think, that wasn't even there maybe 5 years ago. So I hope you enjoy the panel. We're really lucky today. We've got an excellent facilitator. Hang on. We have Karen Davis, who will be facilitating today. She is a senior programmer for the Mill Valley Film Festival and a professor emerita of cinematic arts at California State University in Monterey Bay. She is the recipient of 2 Fulbright Awards for creative scholarship activity in Paris at the French National Film Academy and the recipient of an NEA grant for her work in film and digital media. And she's taught in many places, Vassar, UC Santa Cruz, UC Davis, and she has published works both in world art, Afterimage, and other publications. So she is going to take over from now. We'll have a really exciting conversation and then open it up to you folks. So without further ado, here's Karen Davis.
Thank you, Lexi. Pleasure to be here and an honor to be among these powerful voices here, and we want to hear your voice as well, because we certainly did get Pauline's voice in the film, and I just think it's an amazing film, and we're going to have a pretty live conversation and keep it interactive, but with your permission, we will allow the time for participation on your end for the last 15 to 20 minutes of the conversation that we're going to start here. So feel free to take notes on your cell phone or whatever that you might want to get back to that might come up here, or things that you'd like us to address that emerged in the film. So I hope we can, in the short period of time that we have, really, chow down on some of the types of inspirations that Pauline has left us with today in this moment. So I'd like to introduce the panel, and I'm really happy to have Betsy Bozdech here, and she and I have met for the first time live in person today, the executive editor of ratings and reviews at Common Sense Media, which some of you or many of you have heard of, which is the preeminent rating site for families to look at content that is suitable but doesn't talk down to the younger viewers and users. It's a really intelligent site. And she's worked there since 2006. Her online editorial career includes stints at babycenter.com, Reel.com, emode.com, AOL's Digital City, and Netflix. While she was at Common Sense Media, she was a speaker at international conferences and served as a film festival panelist and juror, interviewing filmmakers, actors, and much more. Her bachelor's and master's degrees are in journalism from Northwestern University, and she's a member of the Alliance of Women Film Journalists and a lifelong movie fan, and she's just come from a 3-year-old's birthday party. Please welcome Betsy Bozdech. And sitting to Betsy's right is Meredith Brody, a lifelong cinephile and the member of our panel who was a protege without necessarily being a Paulette, unless you want to call yourself a Paulette, but Paulinista. But Pauline was Meredith's mentor and frequent pal at the movies. And so in addition to her connection with Pauline Kael, while she was in film school, she worked for Bertrand Tavernier. She was Pierre Lycien's colleague at his advertising firm, and she helped to organize the first Los Angeles Film Festival, which then was known as FilmX. She graduated from film school at the USC and served as a development executive for several indie film companies and for Columbia Pictures as well. She has written much and been well awarded for her writings on film and other subjects. Her writings have appeared in the New York Times, The Village Voice, LA Weekly, and others. And she currently is writing in the digital form on the platforms for IndieWire, RogerEbert.com, and Eat Drink Films, Gary Meyer's platform that many of you, I hope, are familiar with. And please welcome Meredith. And sitting next to Meredith is Ruthe Stein. And she has been a longtime correspondent for the San Francisco Chronicle. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her writings, covering the film industry for over 20 years, reviews, celebrity profiles, industry trend stories, covering Sundance, Toronto, and the Academy Awards. But now she has reinvented herself in a way that I think in fact, everybody here is a film programmer, actually, and she is the founder and programmer for the Mostly British Film Festival, which I hope you all know about, in San Francisco, a celebration of cinema from the United Kingdom and beyond. She holds a bachelor's and master's degree, also from NU, Northwestern University, where I grew up, actually, as well, Evanstonians all. Please welcome Ruthe Stein. Farida, and next to Ruthe is Farida Gbadamosi, and Farida is perhaps modeling Ruth's life in the way most closely for anybody on the panel, in that, as you know, Ruthe began as somebody who was working all aspects of a film, of a cinema, from being the programmer, the booker, the person who answered the phones, took tickets, and whatever it took to get the movies out there. Farida has worked for the most number of film festivals of anybody that I know, so when I want to learn about my colleagues and what they're up to in other festivals, I turn to Farida. She is currently programming U.S. Indies for the Mill Valley Film Festival. She is an emerging writer, who's a freelancer, and so talking about the climate for work in the freelance environment is something that I think reflects back on some of the difficulties that Pauline had getting her start, actually, and getting her writing out there. But in terms of an emerging voice, Farida is certainly that in terms of the programming world. She is recently the director of programming for a new film festival that's launching called the Coven Fest, focusing on non-binary film content. Please welcome Farida Gbadamosi. Okay, so yeah, it's an honor to be hosting the conversation and getting you all to be talking. The first thing, lightning round maybe, would be your takeaways from the documentary film and how particularly you feel like at this moment Pauline's life story and her work is or is not perhaps relevant to the media climate, media environment for media criticism that we're in right now.
I can start because I'm right next to you. For me, one of the things that I found really interesting about the film, especially nowadays in which we have all these conversations about how women are being empowered or allowed to have that space. That Pauline was doing it before it was the thing to do. Pauline was, this is my voice. I like these films. I don't like those films. I'm going to have this strong opinion, and I don't really care if other people do not agree or disagree, because I'm allowed to have a voice outside of what is considered the norm or what's expected, especially as a woman. And I really appreciated that about the film, and I love the film showcases that. And showcases how that was very hard to do at times. We do have this way of speaking about being your own person as if it's the easiest thing to do. But I do appreciate that her story is about sometimes the frustrations that occurred when she did that, but also like how fundamentally being true to herself ended up being the right decision for her as a film critic and in media criticism in general. And I think that was one of the, for me, the most interesting takeaways from the film, just seeing someone be able to own their voice at a time in which that was not even the narrative of the day.
Oh, I think it is.
Well, one of the things that I was struck with is that she came along at a time when movies were changing so radically and they were becoming so wonderful. I mean, who watching that film wouldn't think back and go, oh my God, all those wonderful films that came out in the 70s. And I think that if she were working today, she would might be frustrated because the kind of films that she could really write about and feel for are far and few between these days. And so that was one point I wanted to make. But I also wanted, because this documentary, as complete as it was, didn't really deal with her years in San Francisco, which I know a little bit about in terms of her frustrations because of the lore at the Chronicle and the Examiner about her. So when she was at KPFA and she wasn't being paid, and she was so angry, and part of her anger was that she felt that the gentleman who reviewed films for the Chronicle and the Examiner, some of you old-timers might remember Payne Knickerbocker at the Chronicle and Stanley Eichelbaum at the Examiner, she clearly thought they were idiots. And she took every occasion that she could on the radio and in private conversation and public conversation to say that. My favorite story about her was she was talking about Payne Knickerbocker's review of, I believe it was one of the Godard films, and she said, if you held it up to the light, you could see help written on the other side. So that was the Pauline that lived in San Francisco. I think it must have been hard for her, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if she ever spoke about this, but did she think that she wasn't able to get a job at the papers because she was a woman? I wondered about that. There were just men reviewing films at that time, although in the 80s there was one woman who came on to sort of help Payne Knickerbocker, but there weren't a lot of women in the field, so I wondered if she felt that the bias came in part because of her gender. I don't know if she ever spoke to that point, but it might have. But she so clearly thought she was superior to everybody else. And she
Arguably.
with good reason. With good reason. I was struck by the fact that the career that she constructed, somewhat willy-nilly, would be impossible to create today. That nowadays it's very fragmented. Nobody talks about what Anthony Lane writes at the New Yorker. There's no day after conversation. There's no movie theater that will take out, as David Picker mentioned, a double truck ad that will sell the movie basically just on her words. She was really, I mean, since Pauline, and I have to say this, I read her religiously, which does not mean on my knees. It meant I did it immediately, and I was often struck by the beauty of a phrase, and because we were friends, I would call her sometimes days later and say, I really like such and such a line, and she would pause and she would say, Meredith, you're the only person who's gotten in touch with me at all, which always shocked me, because there were a lot of people who talked about how much, of course it was more difficult in those days to get a hold of people, but still. Also, there's the money aspect. Even though she wasn't paid what she was worth, she was paid a living wage. And nowadays, I mean, it seems to me that when I first started writing in the 70s, I was offered $35 for a piece. And now online, I'm often offered $35 for a piece. So,
At least you're not being paid by the word.
well, I was once upon a time, and when I tell my godchildren, who I caution not to get into the writing business, they can't believe that I was sometimes paid $2 a word. Of course, sometimes the words are very few.
I always say that encouraged verbiage.
So I'll borrow this. You guys have said a lot of things I agree with, Farida, especially what you were saying. I was really struck as someone who does write critically about film and sometimes finds myself second guessing just because of the world and the collective opinion and the Rotten Tomato-ness of it all. Like, am I interpreting this correctly? And this is a great reminder that there is no correct. It's you have your opinion, you have your reaction, and you don't have to worry about what anyone else thinks. And I thought that was great. And I think that what you said about the fragmentation and everything, I was really struck by this idea that there is one person that everybody read, or there's one movie that everybody experienced at the same time, and that's much rarer now to have, at least without, if it doesn't have spandex and cape, to have a collective experience like that, that is really a cultural thing happening at the same time.
So another lightning round. I want to get your feelings, because I think there might be various opinions on the panel. If Pauline were alive and writing today, what do you think she would be the most excited about in film or other media?
Long-form television.
Who wants to take that? Meredith?
Yeah, long-form television. I think there are lots of things that she would be. She loved binge reading, and I think that would have fit it right in. I mean, already we were talking about things years ago, like The Jewel and the Crown, and other things that even if she didn't like them, she wanted to know what was going on. She wanted to see what was attracting people's attention. She might have just sampled it. I mean, I think she would have loved several things. I think she would have loved Iron Man 2, for example.
She was a populist, huh?
Joe, what do you think? Who knows? Yeah. Another protege of Pauline's, a theater
Got a
writer.
Paulette. We have some Paulettes here.
Well, I would love to hear her take on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I also teach film at the University of San Francisco in the Fromm Institute, and I've been teaching classes on melodrama and romantic comedies, and I have Pauline's 501 Nights at the Theater, the movies, and I always go to her first when I'm sort of selecting the films I'm going to choose, and I sort of feel like she's talking into my ear. And the thing that is so astounding is that she's always right. I mean, the films that she says are good, are really good and really special, and some of the ones that might have been touted and I might have been tempted to maybe show, and then I'll read her review, and after she knocks it, I can't show it. So her influence, I think, continues, but in terms of what I said before, but in terms of contemporary films, I think largely she would be disappointed, and your point is very well taken, that she would be much more impressed with what was going on in television, and also the opportunities that television has given to women to direct and write, and I think that would have pleased her a lot.
I was just remembering what I said to Karen, which I said, well, Pauline, I think about her on a regular basis, and often because she's in the papers. She has these 13 books. They have wonderful indexes, a couple of which I helped her with, and people go to the index, pull out a line. It's often the best line in the piece. I mentioned this to Karen a few days ago, and sure enough, last Sunday in the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, there's a little squib about how Burt Lancaster, there's going to be a series of his at Film Forum, and they said he burst onto the scene in The Killers, which was his first movie, and so impressed her that she deemed him a perfect specimen of the Huncus Americanus.
Well, I noticed in Mick LaSalle's review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I don't know if he did this intentionally or unintentionally, but he had that line about people will be talking about it forever, and that was, of course, her line from Last Tango in Paris. And it's become so much a part of our culture that, I mean, he may have thought that he made it up or something, but...
So speaking of the gender identity of the, and issues that Pauline faced, maybe we can go there a little bit. And one of the questions that was posed in the description of the panel, whoever was the lucky one to have written it up, wasn't myself, posed the question, does the gender identity of the critic matter? Which I think is a little bit too narrow, and in today's parlance, it doesn't embrace intersectionality at all. In simple terms, people don't only identify as female, multiple identifications are us. So does the identity, whether it's racial, sexual identification, gender, does it matter today, is the question. I broaden it to anyone.
I think it kind of does. It doesn't mean that I have film critics that are white and male and cis, and straight whose stories I love. There's one who's obsessed with Paddington Bear, like has been on this insane campaign to get Paddington Bear 1 and 2 Oscars, because it's actually a really great film. They're fantastic films. Yeah. So, but like I also recognize that they're two was great. But one of the great things I find is that there's now, I mean, unfortunate that they're all freelance because it's really hard to make a living as a writer, but like there are now so many different voices, and it's not simply that they see the film from a different lens, because like I'll watch a movie and then I go to Sundance, everyone at Sundance says it's great, and then I watch that movie and I'm just like, maybe I'm crazy. That movie was a mess.
There's a collective delusion at Sundance.
But then you have someone who looks like me and sounds like me see the same movie, and they're just like, yeah, I don't know what's going on at Sundance. That movie's a mess. And you're like, great, I'm not crazy. And I do appreciate that sometimes now that there's a variation in the voices allows for people to watch a film and not feel like they have to agree with a critic, because there's so many different voices. And I think that's an interesting part of it. And the other thing is it's the films that get reviewed. One of the great things about Pauline is that she was a populist. So she would actually watch the big films. There's so many film critics who are just above it. They just won't watch it or won't watch a rom-com. The fact that we still call rom-com chick flicks like in a negative means is so gendered and misogynistic, because so many of the films that speak about what our culture are specifically these rom-coms. Like you can say a movie, dramatic film, the vast majority of the public is not going to know that film, but you say When Harry Met Sally, everyone knows that scene in Cats. So it's, my point was that we talk about rom-coms as if pejoratively, as if they're not necessarily good films. We call them chick flicks. But like you'll find that women tend to be the ones who review those films. And those films are actually part of our culture, part of our cultural identity and how we engage with films. And I do think gender identity plays into that. What films we deem good enough to review, what films are considered urban films versus not urban films, what films, it's a queer film, so the only person who's going to watch it happens to be a queer person, but it's actually just a great film. Why is it that we put it in that bucket? But the only people who happen to end up watching it are people from those identities. So I do think that variations in who's watching the films and who's telling these stories results in us learning about more films. Films that we weren't engaging with before, films that were not being pushed forward because of the limited scope of the critics that we were engaging with before that. So I do think it helps in getting a different point of view, but also allowing films that we've kind of ignored or pushed it aside or deemed not good enough, giving them a chance to shine and like recognizing that people engage with these films.
So just thinking about the situation today, and you mentioning the freelance, so many freelance film critics, which was not a phenomenon at all when she was writing. And clearly that's another reason why there is not a Pauline Kael, because there are 9 million critics that are writing out there, and unless you follow somebody regularly, you really don't know whether they agree with your taste or whatever, and it's hard to get that name and to have that influence when people, but the counterpart of that is because of Rotten Tomatoes and the internet. People are a lot more savvy, and they will go to that, and they'll read a whole different mix of critics, women and men, and so that's a very positive point. I've been impressed with our festival. I just hadn't realized, and we write these little blurbs, but then people come into the films and they know so much more about it, and I started to realize it's because they did research before they put the money down for it, and that's, I think that's, and there was another point I wanted to make that I made to you the other day, and I think it's really germane, because the only critic in the Bay Area who has that kind of cachet, like Pauline Kael, is of course Mick LaSalle. And he is read, or on the internet, in the papers or whatever. People agree with him or don't agree with him, but I think by now they probably know who he is. And as someone who was his editor for many years, I can honestly say I don't ever remember a case where there was a movie that seemed to be more of a woman's picture, where I thought he didn't get it because he wasn't a woman. So I think you have to...
But Ruthe, he didn't get it because he wasn't a woman. I love Mick LaSalle.
So.
I know you don't, and that's why
There we go.
I am mildly calling you out. He's a guy.
Let me finish, okay? He also has an absolutely terrific wife who is a playwright, And I know he talks, and I know he
Also
talks
tough.
to her about movies because he's told me that he does that.
So-
and if you want
so
to point
let-
out, tell me about a review that you don't think you got it.
No, I'm not going to go specific.
You
I'm
have
not-
to be specific.
No, I don't have to be specific, but you can tell. All right, there's a study that's done. I'll come back to this. I admire many of the things that Mick LaSalle does, especially I love his Q&A piece that he does on Sunday, where I think sometimes he invents as many of the Q's as the A's, but that's fine with me because they're delightful. No, let me finish.
But they are
now.
real people.
Yeah, I'm reclaiming my time. There's an annual thing called the Study Thumbs Down Film Critics and Gender and Why It Matters. It's been done since 2007 by a woman named Dr. Marka M. Lawson, PhD. And the most recent one, which is slightly better than it has been, male film critics still outnumber women nearly 2 to 1 and continue to dominate the conversation. 66% all over are men, 34% are women, and actually in print it's worse. In print it's 70 to 30. Where the slack is pulled up a little is on TV because you have the visuals, and people make a lot of fun of you if it's only white men. I know a lot of male film critics whose writing I admire, but at the same time I get impatient with them because they haven't led what I consider a real life. As I said, Mazel Tov, that Mick is married and talks to his wife, but there are a lot of guys out there who have not been married, who have not had children, who have not even had what I consider deep dish love affair, and they love movies, and they're writing about what they feel about movies every day, but they're missing a lot, and that lot will be brought by women critics, by critics of color, by critics of other genders, and they exist and they're needed. The basic argument to me is so obvious that I'm reminded of something that many years ago at the New Museum, they had I'm trying to think of the exact title, which I think I wrote down somewhere. Oh, the panel was, is there a gay sensibility? And does it have an impact on our culture? And my dear friend Jeff Weinstein said, no. There is no such thing as a gay sensibility, and yes, it has an enormous input on our culture. and that's the way I feel about people who say, I edited some white guys, and I couldn't tell the difference between them and a woman. And one of the reasons you can't tell the difference is there aren't enough women critics out there.
I totally disagree with you. And I've edited many women critics as well, and I read a lot of criticism. I think there may be some bad critics who don't try to understand things, but I don't think it divides quite that neatly along gender lines.
Betsy, you want to?
Sure.
Want the microphone?
Yeah, just to go back to the root of the question, which was, does a critic's identity, how they identify matter? And I think yes, absolutely, because when you are evaluating a piece of media, you cannot help but bring your experience and your identity to it. So that doesn't mean that I'm going to get it right or wrong, or Mick LaSalle's going to get it right or wrong, but it means that we bring everything we carry with us to it, and we're going to look at it differently because of that. We can't have the same experience of a film. So I think that fundamentally, who you are in whatever way you identify impacts how you interpret it. Your own, like your experiences, like whether you were a West Coaster or an East Coaster, could do the same thing to a degree. And I think that diversifying the voices that we're all reading and paying attention to is a wonderful thing. The more difference we have, the more likely someone's going to find someone to identify with, like Farida said. I know that Rotten Tomatoes did a purposeful reach out to critics who were not white men to try and elevate more people into the tomato meter because it was getting skewed that way. And when you do different filters, you see that like such and such, it's only like 60% positive. If you look at female critics, it's actually at like 90% positive. And so depending on where you who you sympathize with and identify with as a voice that you want to relate to, that could be very valuable information to know.
So the corollary of that then is when there's women's pictures, only women should write about that?
No, absolutely not. But one of the things that this study did is it also broke down how men and women wrote about, for example, male and female directors. And they found out that when it was a female director, women were more likely to publicize their filmography and say that they had also directed X, Y, and Z than men, to an almost startling degree. I mean, I read this in a May 30th, 2019 article on IndieWire, which is very easy to find online, but you can go back to 2007 and see both how it's gotten better and the things that they're studying, and it's eye-opening and fascinating.
And did women not have filmographies when they were male directors?
No. women, how can I put it? I hate to be cliche, but women tended to mention people's contexts more than men did.
But
Men mentioned more context of the men than of the women they were writing about.
So to follow up on that, these women critics, they would mention the other films of women directors, and they would not mention the other films.
No, they were more likely to mention other people's work in both genders. Men were more likely to mention it of male
The
directors.
female director as an anomaly
Yeah.
rather than as a hardworking professional who, according to I think that study and others, I think it's pretty intuitive to know that the odds that a woman can produce a first feature are really, really work against her. And a second feature, if it happens, and I know you know this, Ruthe, too, it's going to be 10 years down the line if they are lucky. Or Jane
But that's changing. It's all changing now.
somewhat. So yes, women have filmographies and don't come out
No,
of
it's changing.
nowhere.
It's changing because of television.
Television is changing
It's
things.
totally changing.
So, Farida, did you want to add?
I was just going to say, speaking about articles, there was a recent piece in the New York Times. I think some people here might have read it, but essentially it's called, I think they softened the title because people are annoyed, but like the original title was "The Dominance of the White Male Critic," and I think it
In
needs
the
to
Me Too age,
In the
by
Me Too.
Manola Dargis.
Yeah, so like it was a great piece that was looking at that study and other studies that was looking at how we have so many conversations about directors and how we have so many conversations about who's in front of the camera, who's behind the camera, but we don't have nearly as much conversation about who's discussing those films and how that also drives change. And I think that like some of this conversation is also about that. It's about recognizing that sometimes we just don't see those things. Like again, the same critic who really likes Paddington Bear loves a lot of other movies. Did not like Black Panther, which got him ripped several times. But like some of it was also just his approach to the film. So like for him, he couldn't see the value beyond it. He just saw a Marvel film with a protagonist. He felt like the film didn't work in that way. But he could not see the cultural side of it. The reason why it was resonating so much with people is because it was essentially one of the first Black superhero films with an all-Black cast, Black director, essentially, and what that represented. And it wasn't that he was like ignoring it or he was being like problematic. It's just a blind spot that he had by virtue of the fact that his lived experience did not need that. Because for him, he was like, well, I've seen this movie and this movie and this movie, so I know it exists. And I'm like, but you've seen those movies because your job is to watch movies. Most people have not seen the films that you are listing because none of those films are mainstream. So like, that is the value of Black Panther. That is the reason why it's different. That is the change. And I think that is the value of having different critics. Because sometimes we get so caught up in this little bubble. Like I will talk about Black Orpheus till I'm blue in the face, and people will just be like, what is that movie? I was like, it's the Criterion Collection. Black movie from Brazil. And they're just like, we didn't know there were Black movies in Brazil. And then I recognize I need to take a step back and recognize that the people I'm engaging with, the everyday people, do not get that. So what you need is someone to push those films, to talk about those films in a way, and speak to the actual audience who's watching those films. And I think that's the shift. It's just a matter of like making sure that you're getting different life experiences for every film that's being watched.
But I can't imagine that there'd be any critic writing today who wouldn't understand that about the Black Panther movie.
I think he understood it. He just didn't see it as enough to elevate what he felt was like a very limited storyline. Because the hero's kind of shot.
I think critics are allowed not to like Black Panther,
Exactly.
which, by the way, I liked.
No, of course, I didn't say like it or not like it, but not understand the context.
Oh no, I think he understood it. He just did not like the movie. Yeah, which is fine. It's totally fine not to like Black Panther. But like my point is, like with different critics, you're just going to get different points of view, and I think it's just about lived experiences, and that's how things shift.
So let me throw this question in here because I realized once we had our first conversation, our phone conference, that one thing we all have in common, and this has a lot to do with the context of that was mentioned already, in this media climate, there's no $2 a word, there's no 10 cents a word, there's no way to get paid even hardly as a freelancer. So in the space that's left open, perhaps, in a positive way, from the lack of a Pauline Kael or a national critical voice, we have film programming, we have film curating, we have the role that each of us has played in trying to broaden the conversation about film and get work out there to a community at a regional, statewide, national, whatever level that we're working as programmers of content. that wouldn't ordinarily be, that would be overlooked. So what would you all say is the role of the film programmer in expanding the critical space that is shrinking with the lack of money and investment in media criticism today?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely true, and what's been very gratifying for me, and perhaps make a nod here to Kevin O'Hara, who's our senior programmer and does all the Irish and Indian films and things that we have discussed, is that distributors have become aware of this. They now often have a festival person that you can talk to. Part of it is that their films sometimes can't get out, and the only way that you can see them on a big screen is at a festival. I've had a very interesting experience because we're already starting to do quite a lot of programming for our festival in February, and there was a film called Ophelia, which some of you may have seen. It was at the 4-Star for like a week. Did not play anywhere else in San Francisco, and we've just grabbed it. I mean, it's a really interesting film. It's Tony Hamlet through the point of view of Ophelia. It has Clive Owens in it, and it didn't get a regular theatrical distribution. There's another movie that I've been chasing for 4 years, which is called Hampstead. It was one of the movies orphaned by Harvey Weinstein when his company went kaflooey, and I've been following it it bounced around from one place to another. Incidentally, this is a film with Diane Keaton and Brendan Gleeson, and it's set in Hampstead, and it's a very commercial film. It's actually a very lovely film as well. And it was played all over the world except in the United States. And I was bugging this one distributor so many times and telling her why she ought to give it to me and why they're making all these mistakes that I finally got a note from her that said, you know, Ruth, none of this is any of your business. But anyway, I'm very pleased to say that we have it this year.
Get your tickets now.
But it's really, I mean, it's been so great for us because this is really all, I have to think.
How many seats does the theater have, the Vogue?
220.
220. So I happen to love this festival, and I attend it religiously. But she's getting it out to 220 people. It's not going to be playing around much more. It's nice that people get to write about it, and therefore maybe somewhere else it'll pop up. But
I like to be a little more impact than that. We do get quite a bit of coverage.
yeah, I said the coverage is great.
But-
220 people get to see. It's frustrating because it's not the whole method of distribution has changed. A lot of us are more likely to stay home with our large screens and send out for DoorDash for pizza. I think they call that Netflix and chill.
But the thing about festivals, and I've watched them evolve this way too, is now they're not just about films. There are wine tastings we've done documentaries about different kinds of liqueurs, and we have tastings, and so they're kind of fun for people to get out and do all these things. So it's just one other avenue, and now several of these films, they will go from one festival to another festival to another festival. So it's not just our festival. We usually have many other people's fingerprints all over it by the time we get it, and then it goes on.
Meredith, I doubt that you were arguing that film festivals play no value in the
No, I adore film festivals. It just makes me sad that you have to be on Saturday at 10 a.m. to see one movie in Ruth's delightful festivals. I sit through all of them. It's very well
We don't
programmed.
show you movies at 10 a.m.
You know what I'm saying, darling. It's 220 people at the most. And there are sometimes times when you can shoot a gun in that festival and not hit anybody. So it does have influence, but it's...
I'm not claiming that we have influence. I'm claiming that we are one conduit for people to get to see films on the screen.
And that's why we have so many festivals in the Bay Area.
Right.
Sometimes I think we have more than one a week.
In a place where we can have a conversation about the film afterward, and that's all. And sometimes we film.
So who else would like to talk about the role of programming and festivals in the current media climate and lack of a national voice like Pauline's?
Well, Common Sense doesn't do programming per se, but we do a lot of curation, because I think that what families find as well is it's just in this world where you have Netflix, you have Amazon, you have Hulu, you have Disney Plus, you have everything. There are too many options, and you want to have something that you can easily, quickly watch with your kids that you know is going to be a good family movie night. And so we have found a lot of value and appreciation for our curated editors' picks list. And I think when you have, everyone wants to be their own movie studio now, and so Netflix has content, and they're all producing it, and it's all coming at you, and having somebody tell you what's worth your time or not is especially as a parent, extremely valuable because you want to make sure that you're not wasting your one family movie night a week or a month on something that's frankly dumb or a waste of time. And so I think that curation is extraordinarily appreciated. And so I think that is what festivals do for not necessarily always family audiences, other people as well. I think more family audiences would be great. I'd love to have, it's nice to be able to take your kids to see some of this stuff. I love short programs at festivals, and I think parents look for that too. But it has to be accessible and easy, and the schedule full of activities.
Actually, Farida, do you want to address this? I don't think.
Oh, yeah. So I will be on a discussion about it. But when I was thinking about programming, because I just finished a term at Frameline where I helped program there, and as she mentioned, I'll be programming at Company Film Festival, and I'm on a committee of people at the USNDs in Mill Valley. But like the cool thing about programming is you need to know your audience, of course, but like you also get the chance. It's the curation. It's to be able to look at a bunch of films and kind of say something and say like this film is important. And I think film festivals now have like this dual role. So like there's the first role in that now we have, it's not so much that we don't have any critics, it's just that no one's getting paid. Everyone's a critic, everyone's got a blog. So everyone's got something to say. And film festivals give those people who can't afford to work for free at a newspaper for 2 years the opportunity to write. So film festivals granted we all have press things and all this other stuff, would give people access to films they wouldn't have access to otherwise, because they're not getting the screeners, they're not getting the access that these other critics are, but they get to see these films that have multiple fingerprints, people have curated it, and they get to see these films and tell you their opinion of it. So if someone is following them, even if it's like a few voices, or maybe it's a film that you've seen, and you've seen all these other critics, but you've never actually seen something that you agree with, and then you find this one blog that happens to get it right for you. Maybe it's the next Pauline, but it's this person who's writing on their blog, and the only reason they saw that film and were able to write that review is because they were at a film festival that showed that film. And I think that is the job in terms of film criticism with programming, but also it just allows for the everyday person to recognize their value as an individual critic for themselves. So that you get to go see a film and you get to form an opinion about that film. You get to go see it. Someone's, of course, curated for it, but we're not telling you what to think. We're telling you to walk into that room and see how you feel. And I think that is also part of the job for a curation and programming job. We are there to help people find content that they can address in a way that, yes, because there's so much content now. And like some of it's really great and some of it's terrible, but like that's okay though, because everyone has their own personal views and ideas of what film and content is. And as a programmer, our job is to just use our own personal voices, but also recognize our audiences and put something out that we hope that you'll enjoy. And then so like we allow the space for critics who do not have access otherwise to come see films, but also for the average audience to see films that frankly are just not coming to the States. Which I think Pauline was in a privileged space in which films were screened, where films were coming straight to her, like she got screeners. I mean, stuff was like still, you go to a theater.
She didn't get screeners.
Well, not screeners, because screeners didn't really exist.
She paid her admission, huh?
Well, actually, she went to many, many screenings in small rooms where she was knowing she was entering them with at least a couple people there who hated her guts. I mean, it wasn't like fun all the time. And there was that odd thing in the movie where they said she was very noisy. I went to lots of screenings with her. She used to sigh occasionally, but she was so busy taking notes. She would go through like 2 yellow legal pads because she took notes on everything. But she was also very adamant. She saw a movie once. She didn't go back and see it. She had a friend named Sheila Benson, who was a critic at the Los Angeles Times
She was in Rain too.
with the fascinating lineage. Her mother was a screenwriter named Mary McCall Jr. I never understood why she was Mary McCall Jr. She was largely famous for doing a series of comedies for Ann Southern at MGM, the Maisie series.
Oh.
And the favorite review that she ever got, this is a bit of a parenthetical comment, but it should let you know something about women writers. A critic, a male critic, wrote about one of the Maisie movies and said it was a terrible script. Thank God Ann Southern was there to enliven the script with her usual line of snappy patter. The snappy patter obviously been written by Mary McCall Jr. But anyway, no, Pauline was very busy writing, and she worked very hard. She said something to me when I was very young and I didn't get it, and it took me years before I understood. She was talking about how much she loved to write at the New Yorker, and she said, they give you 2 sets of galleys. I didn't even
didn't get one set of galleys, meaning that she could correct one, and if it came back and she still wanted to correct it, she had time. And they listened to her. I mean, she had certain editors that she fought with, but she could, like James Joyce, she could practically rewrite an entire piece that she'd been thinking about since she wrote it initially and get it right.
I wanted to just add on to something that you were saying about the audience's responses to films. One thing that's fascinating for me when I look at a lot of these films that we're thinking about getting, that have been at other festivals, you can get onto the critics, but you can also get onto the audience responses on Rotten Tomatoes. The audience responses sometimes are so good. I mean, people really take time to think about the film, and they write and interest you. Sometimes they're more interesting than the critics' views on some of them. They're worth looking at. So we have, I think, a very, I know this in the Bay Area, having been a movie editor for a couple of decades, that we have an incredibly sophisticated film audience out here. But that's true, I think, all over the place. People have gotten to know more about films. It's funny, too, in a way, because without Paul and Kale whispering in their ear, they've sort of found their way to knowing what's good and what's not good. And I'm sort of amused and pleased by seeing some of these comments that regular people make about films.
So let's turn our last 15 minutes over to more of an interactive discussion. Nancy?
Hi, I really enjoyed the panel. I have a question, and I'd like you to answer it more with a Dorothy Parker hat than an Emily Post hat.
I'm going to repeat this question for those that can't hear it. So,
Who do you think whose film criticism today do you think Pauline Kael would have loved, and whose film criticism today do you think she would have hated?
the question is, whose film criticism today do you think Pauline would have loved, and whose would she have hated?
I'm not touching that with a 1 foot pole.
1 foot.
Well, I'm just thinking of the old timers. Joe Morgenstern is still around as the Wall Street Journal, and I think he's always pretty much right on.
He was one of her proteges.
Okay, and then this is somebody that some of you may remember, but she was my protege, Carol Meyer, who was the woman critic of the Chronicle for a number of years and then she started reviewing the Bee, and now she's doing something completely different. But I thought she had a really great voice, and I think Pauline Kael would like to be her. Oh, you said who would she not like? Yeah, I don't know enough critics today. Please answer that.
I would venture a guess that anyone who writes reviews to be blurbed on posters or in ads. Feel-good movie of the summer,
But you can't write
soundbite.
You don't get chosen, and they choose you. You don't.
Yeah, but there are people who write for that.
Copy it.
There aren't many yet anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
Are there any very feminist critiques that actually come from that point of view every time they write a critique?
Are there expressly self-identified feminist film critics in the media universe that you know about that we can direct people to who are interested in feminist criticism of a particular film? Is that what you're asking? Anybody? Yeah.
Well, there's a collective of them at the awfj.org, the Alliance of Women Film Journalists, that I've been a group that I've been a part of for a couple years that's been around for a dozen years. It is a group of more than 100 female editors and writers who analyze movies specifically from a film-centric point of view. We have a Movie of the Week panel where lots of people weigh in. There are individual reviews and interviews and blurbs, so I would highly recommend it. awfj.org.
Association of
Alliance.
Alliance.
Alliance of Women Film Journalists.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things, thank you for this discussion, one of the things that I think, returning to the documentary, that interests me is the implicit argument between theory and taste. Her dispute, obviously, around the auteur theory was a dispute that film criticism shouldn't be generated from theory, but really from individual taste. I thought the failure of the film, which I really enjoyed sitting through, was that it never tried to really appraise that taste. It sort of documented it without really trying to analyze what it was, and as a result, the idea of her as an artist through her criticism never got fully expressed. But be that as it may, I wonder where you all sit around that particular conundrum. You mentioned a consortium of feminist criticism. That's coming out of theory rather than taste. taste obviously gets applied within that context. But I thought that was an issue that the film really generated, and I wanted to see more of it. Does that make sense as a question?
What's the question?
The question is, where do you sit in terms of criticism driven by personal taste versus, and her taste obviously was of the highest order, versus criticism that emanates from some kind of theory, Marxism,
Well,
feminism.
the thing about theory is that sometimes it constructs a coffin into which you can only put a skeleton or somebody that's dead. I mean, a theoretician who's a lively writer and has interesting opinions, great. I mean, there are lots of them out there. But if it's just about making the film conform to your theory. I mean, I happen to be an auteurist. Pauline wasn't, but we used to laugh about it because I would say, as they said in the movie, you've created a number of auteurs with your criticism. And one thing that's maybe a little bit, well, other people have said it, so I can't. Pauline was always shocked when a filmmaker that she loved and had supported for many, many years and considered, if not a close friend, because she was wary of being close friends with almost everybody. When she wrote, she considered an honest and good review, like a Woody Allen, and he stopped talking to her. And the same thing happened with Altman. And she was very unhappy and didn't understand it. It's like, but I am who I am, and you only like me when I like you. In both cases, they made up, but it was very hard for her.
We sort of wonder about who the young critics today, not young critics, I'm sorry, the young filmmakers today, which one she would like. I was interested to hear David Russell talk, and I thought he spoke quite well on the documentary, but we sort of wonder, I mean, just throwing it out to you, who are the sort of film directors that are sort of just making it in the last 10 years or so, past Pauline, that you think she would?
She always surprised me. I didn't know. I mean, and I used to surprise her too. One of the things about Pauline, she didn't care whether you agreed with her or not. She wanted you, in fact, I had a habit after seeing a movie, since I didn't want to be influenced with her, I would blurt it out right away. She would laugh, her little silvery laugh, and we'd start talking. And that was the whole basis of our friendship. I sort of say I wasn't intimidated by her. Of course, sometimes I was intimidated by her because she was Pauline Kael. But talking with her was very easy, and she was one of the greatest talkers I ever met in my life. She raised your game. She was still lively and awake at 2 and 3 in the morning, despite the fact that she was 30 or 40 years older than me. And she wanted to talk about everything: literature, art, clothes. I used to write about fashion a little for the Village Voice, and she loved it. And she actually taught me something once. She had a uniform. I was almost going to wear it today, but I would have had to buy it all from scratch. She wore little velvet pants and 100% beautifully printed silk shirts. And I was with her in LA once, and we went to a place called Don Loper, who had been a IEI fashion designer for movies, and now he had a little shop. And his shirts were very expensive, and I admired one that had a beautiful pattern of matches on it. And she said, "Let me get it for you." And every time she said this, except for once or twice, I always said no. And I said no, and rather than saying, because it's $110, Pauline, I said, because I don't need any clothes. And she said, don't be ridiculous. Never wait until you need clothes. Always buy clothes before you need them. And she was right. It was very good advice.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Meredith. I cut you off. Was there more? Let's go to
Yeah, thank you. I'd just be interested in a little more about her personal life.
Yeah.
The movie gave us some points. Had a daughter who seemed to have been a good part of her life anyway, working for her mom.
They had a complicated relationship.
And
I love Pauline dearly, but I did think that she sort of clutched Gina too tight to her bosom for a couple of reasons. She was an only child. She had had touchy health as a child. She had rheumatic fever, and there was always heart problems. Pauline both kept her too close. I mean, the fact that she typed all of her mother's works and edited forever, she did break away a little bit. But for example, she lived next door to Pauline. She had her own house, but it was next door. And she did marry and have a child, and the guy was no longer with the family. He had problems with Pauline, as well as with other people. And the thing that would have killed Pauline, and I'm glad Joe knows what I'm talking about, I'm glad she died before this happened, her very, 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 I'm stuttering, I'm so upset. her grandson Willie, who she adored and who she worked very hard for after leaving. Every time she'd get a speaking engagement, she'd say to me, "This is for Willie." And he was troubled and he committed suicide. And that would have killed her, so I was glad that she was no longer with us, although I miss her. No, the person interviewing her actually is an adorable young girl, and she's the daughter of Alan Barra, who was a sports writer at the Voice, who was also a friend of Pauline. She had Catholic taste. She didn't just, she tried to get Sean to publish my food writing, and she tried to get Gottlieb to publish my food writing. She liked writers of all different stripes. And she had a school project, so that was it. And I loved it. I wish it had been Willie, but...
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what my question is, except I'm struck by the moral complexity statement about, I think it was Apocalypse Now when they were discussing it. You know, I'm struck by the daughter's discussion of how she really hurt people. Not surprised that the filmmakers you were discussing, you know, distanced themselves from her. We only got that one little bit of it. I thought it was really fascinating about her, that if she wanted films to be morally complex, it seemed like personally she was pretty complex too.
Aren't we all?
As we all are. But I didn't get that much in the film, and I didn't, maybe it wasn't a part of your panel to talk about that.
Moral complexity, based
on
on
who she was and how her, I love the point in the film about how her strength was also her weakness that hurt other people. So, if anything about that.
That was Gina's take on it, and I was at the memorial service, and I love Gina, but she had problems with her mother, and she felt obliged. That wasn't even like, in some ways, the worst part of her speech. That was the one that was the most applicable. But she painted, there were many intakes and gasps of breath during her short. It was
But aside
tough.
from that, what about her that was complex? And the issue of moral complexity as her touchstone as a critic. If that fits, maybe it doesn't.
I'm not sure I got that personally so much from her work as a critic, the fact that she hurt people with her words by being honest when she knew other critics were working for either advertising or, as the film puts it, afraid of their editors and afraid to say what they feel. And there's also the issue of fragile egos. Shall we even add fragile male egos in the part of somebody and those who are used to being supported and propped up for everything they do, like a David Lean, that or she took on the Titans, that she would say things about the Von Trapp family and Julie Andrews that what did she call her, as sexless, airbrushed, and inhumanly happy. Wasn't there one little Von Trapp who didn't want to sing his head off? What she says about the European New Wave, comes party and celebrate the dying soul of Europe.
This has been said before. It wasn't her opinions, it was the way she stated them. I intended to come here and horrify all of you by saying that basically since Pauline's death, I don't really read film criticism anymore. It sort of exists in a vacuum for me. I certainly don't read it before, because I hate knowing every beat of the plot, the 3 best lines, the 2 best jokes. One of the reasons I love film festivals is if I'm a little careful, I can go in not knowing anything of what I'm about to see, and it's fun. And then afterwards, who has the time? And you Google. I am going to go back on that. I saw a film, Long Day's Journey into Night, a Chinese film, which I saw last weekend, and I haven't had time to read about it since because I've been at the Jewish Film Festival. I highly recommend it. And I'm going to go back and try to make sense of it through some other people's perceptions, because I know what I think about it, but there are other voices out there I might want to hear.
There was an incident that happened at San Francisco International many, many years ago. Sidney Lumet was the guest of honor, and he was talking on the stage, and he took on Pauline Kael, really took her on, and was very, very critical. And somebody yelled out from the audience, her reviews will live on longer than your films. But what I was struck by in this documentary is that both of them have lived on. Lindsay has made some great films, and Pauline Kael, and even the fact that so many years after her death that somebody could get the funding and do this documentary, and we're all sitting here talking about it. So both things can be true.
Oh, thank you.
Actually, I'm sorry, there was a hand up there that I saw first, and then we'll get to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the panel and for the movie. I wanted to share a thought. I don't know if it will prompt a response or not, but I started reading Pauline Kael when I was a teenager and into my 20s, and I just really enjoyed it, and in some ways agree that I haven't read other critics in the same way since. I think what she gave to a lot of us was a framework on how to think about film. And while I was watching this film, I was remembering that that was still the case. But I was also thinking, when we're looking at the idea of complexity, that, and I don't know if it was in the film or in her life, I didn't quite get in there, but she was very clear. I heard her talk about what it was like as a woman and what she faced because of that in her profession as a critic. And I remember disagreeing with her on her review of Last Tango in Paris and other reviews where I wanted her to look much more closely at the misogyny in the film. And you know, there's a lot that I can remember from those days, and so
One of Pauline's weaknesses was she was fond of certain misogynists. One of the things that we broke over is that she loved this James Toback.
Well, so I'm glad you said that, because I just wanted to say, and maybe get more of a response, that I was, and always have been, really a great fan of hers in the sense of how to look at a film. I felt I learned a lot from that. But there was that, there was, you know, a variety, you know, Clockwork Orange, all kinds of things that were in the 70s that people will still say this was a great time of film. But it was such a time of misogyny that we're really looking at it through a different lens today. And I mean, I'm not going to say, do you think she would look at it differently now, because who knows, but, or maybe not, but I want to just throw that into the conversation, that when we talk about a woman reviewing a film, you still need to get to what I would call an insightful feminist look at the violence and what's going on. So for me, it's not just a woman or the gender, but it's really the consciousness of what we're looking at as we're watching the film. So I just want to throw that into the conversation.
Do you think Me Too movement would have affected Pauline in some way?
Well, yes and no. I mean, as I said, we had conversations about, she liked bad boys. And some of her bad boy friends, such as James Toback, who I knew rather well, horrified me. He's famous. I'm surprised that he hasn't been strung up and crucified. He was famous for having cards printed up that said he was a famous director. I mean, I saw this in action. I lived in New York for many years, and not just when he left Pauline, you know, having lunch at the Harvard Club. He did this on a daily basis. He also made prank calls to John Simon. And every time I would tell her that I found this horrible, she would laugh and sort of justify it for various means. I mean, but oh darling, he's so whatever he was. And I think that she would have, how can I put it? I think she might have started out by dismissing it, but I think if some of her other friends had had serious conversations with her, she would have, if not given in, she would have at least seen the truth of it, especially if it made people who she was close to articulate and upset.
I want to leave you with the last, because we're running a little bit over our time, and leave you with the last question or comment.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for the panel, thanks for the film. Couple of things. I think what makes Pauline Kael important is that she was an independent thinker. I think that she would have been that no matter what medium she was in. But I want to ask you, especially Meredith, if you don't mind, did she ever change her opinion about a film? It sounds as though she made her mind up very quickly. She was taking a lot of notes. Did she ever, I'm not done yet, did she ever change her mind? And we get from the movie that she had a very, very strong historical sense of film. She had a lot of scenes in her mind from prior movies from way back when. do you think she also had a very strong contextual sense? For example, with Godard was part of the Nouvelle Vague, which is Truffaut, Chabrol, Rivette, Romer. Do you think she had an equal sense of where they were located at the moment, apart from being individual filmmakers? Do you think she saw the films in relation to other people making films at the time? I guess anybody could take that.
So I don't know how I can summarize the question for those that didn't hear, but it is about two things. Did Meredith in particular, having been in dialogue with her quite a lot, did she ever change her mind on a film? The second part of the question that was open to the rest of the group was, do you think she was prescient or visionary in the sense that she, when she was critiquing the French New Wave, that she had a sense of what this movement was? Did she understand the context that she was writing in, if I gather that, or if you want to make it more succinct, or maybe...
Yeah, let me just say it more clearly. She had a very strong historical sense. Did she also have a sense of how the films interacted with each other in the moment, especially in terms of the Nouvelle Vague, where there were the five of them who were playing off each other, not just Godard?
She liked some of their movies, and some of their movies she didn't, which you can see by reading through them. And I don't think she considered them as a group. I mean, she knew what they meant by Nouvelle Vague, but she would, each movie, she would take on its own merits. Mm-hmm. And there was a time when she loved Godard, and then there was a time when she liked his movies less. And the other question... changing your mind? No, I don't think so.
You might have Bonnie and Clyde, was it another bit of
No. It was Joe Morgenstern who changed his reasoning of his feeling about Bonnie and Clyde after she wrote. He said he was going to... He might have even given it a bad review in Newsweek, and then she laughed and said, "Oh, darling, take another look at it." And he did, and he reversed himself. Now, Pauline wasn't fond of people, except in that instance, reversing themselves. I remember a Los Angeles critic who should be nameless, because I like her work in general. She wrote an entire piece about how recently she had reviewed a movie and then seen it again and felt differently about it. And this had happened twice in recent times. And among the Paulettes, we said, that means, don't trust me, I don't know what I think. So.
Okay, well, thank you all very much.